To believe the night preys only upon the innocent is the most dangerous lie ever whispered into the ear of a sleeping world. The true darkness, the one with teeth and an ancient hunger, does not hunt the lamb cowering in the field. It seeks the shepherd who barters the flock, the merchant who deals in flesh and soul under the blind eye of a dead moon. These are the transactions that crack the mirror between worlds, inviting things to peer through. I have sat in silence and listened to the echoes left behind by those they call cariñosas, a gentle word for a profession carved from desperation and shadow. Their confessions are not of sin, but of survival and of the things they encountered when the price was paid, the door was closed, and the mask of humanity slipped from the face of their patrons. These are not mere stories, they are scars burned into the memory of the cosmos. I remember a voice, thin as a thread of smoke, telling me of a man whose hands were always cold, not the chill of a winter evening, but the profound, absolute cold of a forgotten grave. She called herself Luna, a name she chose to honor the only light she trusted in her world of manufactured daylight and suffocating darkness. This man, he never spoke his name. He paid in old bills, crisp and smelling of dust, and something vaguely like dried flowers, funeral flowers. He would sit in the chair by the window of her small room, the one with the cracked pane that whistled when the wind blew, and he would just watch her. He never touched her, never asked for anything more than her time, an hour of her life bought and paid for, while the city's heart hammered on outside, oblivious. Luna said the true terror began not with his presence, but with his absence. After his third visit, she noticed things changing in her room. A fine layer of dust, like cold ash, would settle on everything he had faced. The chair, the windowsill, the floorboards before him. It was a sterile gray powder that seemed to suck the warmth from the air. She would clean it, scrubbing until her fingers were raw, but the next morning it would return, a silent testament to his spectral vigil. Then came the whispers, not from the cracked window, but from the mirror on her dresser. It was a cheap thing, its silvering, flaking at the edges like a decaying memory, but after his visits, her own reflection would seem delayed, lagging a fraction of a second behind her movements, as if reluctant to mimic a woman who sat with the dead. The whispers from the mirror grew from incoherent murmurs into distinct, chilling words. They spoke of the clay, the soil, the cold embrace of the earth. They were not for her, she realized with a jolt of ice in her veins. They were for him. The mirror was remembering his thoughts, the profound, lonely silence of a being no longer part of the living world. This is the price of such transactions. You see, you don't just sell your time or your body, you sell a piece of your sanctuary. You open a door in your life, and you have no idea what will wait on the other side, or what it might leave behind when it goes. Her room was no longer just a room, it had become a tomb, an antechamber for a soul that had forgotten how to pass on. One night, the mirror showed her something more. As she sat brushing her hair, her hand moving mechanically, her eyes met her reflection, and behind her, standing in the center of the room, was Hetch's form. It was translucent, like smoke trapped in glass, but it was undeniably him, dressed in his old-fashioned suit. The horror, however, was not his presence. The horror was that, in the reflection, he was not looking at her. He was looking past her, at the empty chair by the window, a look of infinite longing on his face. He was a ghost haunting his own memory, and she was merely part of the scenery. The chair was his anchor, the room his purgatory, and her presence was the ritual that gave his lonely haunting a fleeting sense of purpose. He was not a client. He was a pilgrim. She never saw the man of cold hands again. She fled that room, leaving everything behind, running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back and the chilling echo of the whispers from the glass. She understood that some bargains are not paid with money, but with resonance. He had paid to sit in a space where life, in its most raw and carnal form, still happened. He was a spectre drawn to a flame, not for its heat, but simply to remember that light once existed. But in doing so, he had leached the warmth from her life, leaving behind a permanent frost on her soul. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? That cold spot in the room, that reflection that moves too slow. Let the darkness know if you have felt such a presence. Acknowledge the chill in the comments below. The stories often bleed into one another. You see, the path of one lost soul crosses another in these forgotten places. There was another I listened to, a man this time, who we shall call Silas. He worked the other side of the coin, offering comfort in exchange for secrets, a warm body to chase away the chill of a lonely hotel room. He thought he had seen every shade of human desperation, every pathetic mask men wear to hide their hollow cores. He was wrong. He told me of the Hotel Viridian, a place on the edge of the city, a concrete monolith whose windows looked like 1,000 vacant eyes staring into the encroaching highway. It was a place for transients, for secrets, for endings. It had a reputation for bad luck. The wallpaper peeled in long strips like sunburnt skin, and every faucet dripped with a maddeningly irregular rhythm. Silas was called to room 313. The name on the request was simply a traveler. The air in the hallway was thick and stagnant, smelling of stale cigarettes and something else, something metallic and sweet, like old blood. When the door opened, the man inside was unremarkable, pale, thin, with eyes that seemed too large for his face. He gestured for Silas to enter, and the moment the door clicked shut, the sound of the dripping faucet in the bathroom became all Silas could hear. It was a hammer counting down to something terrible. The man said nothing. He simply sat on the edge of the bed and pointed to a small wooden music box on the nightstand. He wanted Silas to open it. That was the service he was paying for. A simple request, yet a cold dread washed over Silas. The music box was old, its dark wood carved with unsettling, non-Euclidean shapes that seemed to shift and writhe at the edge of his vision. It felt wrong in his hands, unnaturally heavy, humming with a vibration that sank into his bones. The traveler's eyes never left him, wide and unblinking, filled with a mixture of terror and anticipation. Silas knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he should not open that box, that some things are meant to remain closed, that some melodies should never be played again. But the money was on the dresser, and in his world, you fulfilled the contract. The door was locked. The faucet dripped. Drip, 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 drip. His hand trembled as he reached for the small, tarnished latch. With a faint click, he opened the lid. There was no music, only silence, a profound, absolute silence that swallowed the sound of the dripping faucet, the hum of the hotel, the very beating of his own heart. A fine black dust, like pulverized charcoal, puffed out from the velvet lining, and the room plunged into a darkness that was more than just the absence of light. It was a presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The traveler began to weep, not with sadness, but with a horrifying, gut-wrenching relief. "She's quiet now," he whispered, his voice trembling. "For a little while, she's quiet." In the oppressive dark, Silas understood. He had not opened a music box. He had opened a cage, and whatever had been inside was now free, in the room, with them. The darkness held for what felt like an eternity. Silas was frozen, his lungs burning for air he dared not breathe. He could feel it, a malevolent intelligence, a predatory stillness that was studying them both. He could feel its ancient hatred, its hunger for sound, for life, for anything to break the horrible silence it imposed. The traveler's weeping subsided, replaced by a soft, rhythmic clicking sound. It was the sound of his teeth, chattering uncontrollably. Then, a whisper slithered through the black, seeming to come from right beside Silas's ear. It was a woman's voice, distorted and layered, like 1,000 broken recordings playing at once. And it said one word, liar. The traveler screamed, a high, thin sound that was instantly choked off, replaced by a wet, tearing noise. When the lights flickered back on, revealing the grimy, peeling wallpaper of room 313, Silas was alone. The traveler was gone. The music box was on the floor, open and empty, and on the rumpled bedsheets, where the man had been sitting, was a single dark stain, already drying to the color of rust. It was a small stain, no bigger than a man's hand. There was no other sign of a struggle, no evidence he had ever been there, except for the money still sitting on the dresser. Silas fled, leaving the payment behind. Some debts are too high to collect. He understood then that the Hotel Viridian wasn't just a place of bad luck. It was a wound, a place where the skin of reality was thin, and things could be lured through, trapped, and sometimes released. What the stars don't tell you openly is that places, like people, can be violated. They can be broken in ways that never heal. These locations become psychic scars on the landscape, drawing in more pain, more darkness, feeding on the despair that pools within their walls. Room 313 was not just a room, it was a listening post for the abyss. The traveler was not a man, he was a warden, carrying his prison with him, desperately seeking a moment's peace by passing the burden to another. Silas was meant to be the next warden, the next soul to be haunted by the silence in the box. But he ran, and now the thing from the box is free, wandering the halls of the Viridian, looking for a new voice to steal. What you are hearing now, this is more than just a tale, it is a warning. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your presence here gives me strength to speak of these things. Subscribe, become part of the bulwark against the silence. Let us now speak of objects, not just haunted things, but objects of contagion, a cursed necklace, a tainted ring. These are the stuff of cheap fiction. The reality is far more subtle, far more insidious. I was told of a woman named Clara, a dancer whose beauty was a currency she spent in the high-stakes world of powerful men. She moved through penthouses that scraped the sky, rooms where decisions that shaped the world were made over glasses of aged whiskey. In this world, gifts were common, baubles to appease a guilty conscience, or chains to mark ownership. She received a gift one evening from a man whose name is still whispered in the halls of power, a man whose shadow stretched across continents. It was an antique silver locket, heavy and cold, engraved with a serpent eating its own tail. The man told her it was a family heirloom, a token of his affection. But his eyes, when he said it, held no warmth. They were cold and flat, like chips of obsidian. Clara felt a strange reluctance to wear it. The locket was always cold to the touch, even against the warmth of her skin, and it refused to be polished. always maintaining a dull, leaden sheen, as if it absorbed the light around it. But the man was not someone you displeased, so she wore it, and the locket began to work its subtle poison. Her reflection in the high-rise windows would sometimes wear the locket. Even when she had taken it off, it would be there, a silver gleam against her throat in the glass, a ghostly promise of its permanence. She started having dreams. The dreams were always the same. She was in a vast, empty ballroom, the kind her patrons favored, but the chandeliers were dark, and the windows were boarded over. In the center of the room was a single chair, and tied to it was a woman she did not know, yet felt an intimate connection to. This woman wore the locket, and from the shadows at the edge of the room, figures would emerge. They had no faces, just smooth expanses of skin, and they would move toward the woman, their intentions a palpable wave of malice. Clara would try to scream, to run, to help the captive woman, but she was frozen, a helpless observer. The faceless figures would reach the woman, and the dream would end. She would awaken with the locket, feeling ice cold against her skin, the Ouroboros seeming to bite deeper into the silver. She began to see them when she was awake, a faceless man standing across the street, watching her, a featureless woman reflected in the polished surface of an elevator door. They were always at a distance, silent, observing. She was becoming the woman in the chair, and the world was becoming her ballroom prison. She tried to get rid of the locket. She threw it into the river, only to find it back on her nightstand the next morning, dry and cold, waiting for her. She buried it in a park, but a groundskeeper found it and returned it to her building's concierge, thinking it a valuable lost item. The locket did not want to be lost. It had chosen her. The man who gave it to her had vanished. His business concluded, leaving her with his heirloom. Clara grew thin, her beauty fading like a photograph left in the sun. The life drained out of her, poured into the cold silver of the locket. The boundary between her dreams and her waking hours blurred until the faceless figures were her only constant companions. She was a prisoner in her own life, bound by an invisible chain to a fate that had been passed down to her. This is the nature of true cursed objects. They are not merely haunted, they are symbiotic. They are spiritual parasites that latch onto a host, draining them of their vitality, their identity, their very soul, before moving on to the next victim. The man hadn't given her a gift. He had passed on a sentence. He had paid her to take his place in the chair. He was free, and now she was the one waiting for the faceless audience to draw near. The story of Clara doesn't have a clean ending, because the Locket story isn't over. She disappeared one day. No note, no sign of struggle. Her penthouse apartment was immaculate, except for the silver locket sitting in the center of her perfectly made bed, waiting. It is out there still, a beautiful piece of silver passed from hand to hand, a token of affection from a powerful man to a beautiful woman, a key that unlocks a private, terrifying ballroom. It is a contagion of despair, a curse that wears the mask of a gift. Beware the things you accept, the bargains you strike. The price is not always apparent. Sometimes the cost is your reflection, your dreams, your face. Sometimes the payment is you. The true horror is not the ghost in the machine, but the poison in the gilded cage. And this is where everything changes for you. You believe you are merely a listener, a passive observer to these whispers from the abyss. But every word you hear forges a link. Every chill you feel is a resonance, a tuning fork vibrating to the frequency of these events. The darkness knows it is being watched. There was another tale, one that speaks directly to this connection, a story of a woman named Serafina who worked in a small, dimly lit room above a bar that smelled of spilled beer and regret. She was different. She had a sight. She didn't seek it, didn't want it, but it came to her in flashes, in moments of extreme emotion or physical contact. She saw things about the men who paid for her time, not their futures, but their truths, the rot they carried inside. When a man touched her, she would see it, a brief, violent vision, like a cracked mirror showing a shard of a broken soul. She saw the embezzler's numbers burning behind his eyes, a cage of fire and shame. She saw the adulterer's heart, a shriveled, black thing, wrapped in the grasping hands of his wife and his mistress, tearing it apart. These visions were a curse, a constant barrage of the filth that men concealed beneath their tailored suits and false smiles. She learned to build walls in her mind, to become numb, to see these horrors as nothing more than clouds passing in a stormy sky. She performed her role, took the money, and scrubbed her skin raw afterward, trying to wash away the psychic residue of their sins. But one man was different. He was a quiet man, unassuming, with the weary eyes of a long-distance driver. He paid for an hour and asked only to talk. He spoke of his loneliness, the endless miles of highway, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. Serafina felt a rare pang of sympathy. She reached out, placing a hand on his arm in a gesture of comfort, and the vision that struck her was not of greed or lust. It was of blood, so much blood. She saw him, not in his truck, but in a small, tidy suburban house. She saw a woman with kind eyes and a man with a trusting smile. She saw a hammer. She saw the walls painted crimson. She saw him burying two misshapen bundles in a shallow grave in the woods, the cracked cross of a broken branch marking the spot. Serafina recoiled, snatching her hand back as if burned. The man's weary expression didn't change, but his eyes went cold, the mask of the lonely traveler dissolving to reveal the abyss beneath. "You saw that, didn't you?" he said, his voice a low, flat whisper. "I always wondered if someone could. They say people like you, you're closer to the other side. You can see the stains." He wasn't angry. He wasn't scared. He was curious. He saw her not as a person, but as a phenomenon, a cracked mirror that had finally shown him his own monstrous reflection. And in that moment, Serafina understood a terror far deeper than seeing the sins of others, the terror of being seen by the sinner, the horror of a monster realizing you know its name. She tried to play it off, to feign ignorance, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But it was too late. The connection had been made. He smiled, a thin, cruel curve of his lips. "It's a heavy thing to carry alone," he said, standing up. "Maybe you can help me carry it." He left the full payment on the table and walked out, disappearing back into the city's veins. But he had left something behind, far worse than the cold ash of the ghost or the silence of the music box. He had left a piece of his darkness, tethered to her. Now, when she closes her eyes, she doesn't just see the memory of what he did, she sees it through his eyes. She feels the weight of the hammer, the spray of warmth, the grim satisfaction. She is trapped in the passenger seat of his soul, a permanent witness to his crimes. This is the most profound danger of all, not to witness the supernatural, but to become an accomplice to human evil. The man didn't need to threaten her. He had infected her. He had made her a keeper of his secret, a secret that now festers in her mind, poisoning her thoughts, her dreams, her very being. She sees that broken cross in the woods every time she closes her eyes. She is as haunted by his victims as he is, perhaps even more so. He has the solace of his own depravity. She only has the horror. She is a living ghost story, a walking crime scene. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Has a secret ever been laid upon you that stained your soul? Share its weight in the ether below. Your confession may lighten the load, if only for a moment. The threads of these stories weave a tapestry of dread, and the pattern it reveals is that the greatest horrors are not visited upon us, but invited through bargains, through desperation, through the simple transactional nature of a world that has forgotten the sanctity of the soul. There is a place, a specific street corner in a city whose name I will not utter, that is more than just a location. It is an entity. The locals call it the Weeping Corner because the ancient sewer grate on its curb is perpetually damp, even in the driest summer. They say it's a leaky pipe. I know better. The corner itself is a wound, a place where so much pain and misery have been exchanged that the very ground has become saturated with sorrow. It weeps tears of rust and forgotten memories. The women who work this corner speak of the Shadow Man. He is not a ghost, not a demon, but something else, a consciousness born from the collective despair of the place. He has no single form. Sometimes he is a flicker of movement in a darkened alley, a shape that is too tall, too thin. Other times he is the face you glimpse for a second in a passing car window, a face of pure, undiluted anguish. He is the feeling of being watched when the street is empty, the sudden, paralyzing cold that has nothing to do with the weather. He doesn't speak, he doesn't act, he feeds. He draws sustenance from the desperate hopes and bitter disappointments, the fleeting moments of connection, and the long hours of lonely cold that define life on that corner. One woman who called herself Rain told me she tried to fight him. She was new to the corner, still clinging to a sliver of defiance. She would curse at the shadows, burn sage in the alleyways, draw protective symbols in chalk on the pavement, but it was like trying to fight the tide with a broom. The chalk would be washed away by the corner's perpetual weeping. The scent of sage would be swallowed by the stench of decay. The Shadow Man would simply watch. She said the worst part was the feeling of him in her head. When a car would slow, a potential client, she would feel a wave of utter hopelessness wash over her, a whisper in her mind telling her it was pointless, that this would end in violence or disgust, that there was no escape. He was poisoning her well of hope. The Shadow Man's influence grew stronger the longer a woman worked the corner. They would become listless, their eyes vacant, their movements mechanical. They were shells, animated by the grim necessity of survival, but their inner light had been consumed. The corner was digesting them. Rain saw it happening to the older women, the ones who had been there for years. They no longer spoke of leaving, no longer dreamed of a different life. They spoke only of the corner, of its rules, its rhythms, as if it were the entire world. They were priestesses in a temple of despair, and the Shadow Man was their silent, hungry god. He offered no damnation, no fire and brimstone. His hell was simply the utter absence of hope, an eternal gray twilight of the soul. Rain knew she had to leave when she saw her own face in a puddle of the corner's weeping tears, and for a moment, it wasn't her own. It was gaunt, empty, her eyes hollowed out, her mouth a thin line of resignation. It was the face of the women who had been there for a decade. It was the face the corner was making for her. The Shadow Man was showing her the final product, the empty vessel she was destined to become. That night, she walked away and never looked back. She said she could feel him tugging at her, a cold, invisible hand clutching at the back of her coat, a silent scream of hunger from the place she had escaped. She still dreams of that corner, of the weeping grate, and the suffocating presence of the thing that calls it home. This is the ultimate parasite, a genius loci, a spirit of place, born from human misery. It is a stark reminder that our emotions have weight, that they can saturate the world around us, and in certain cursed places coalesce into something sentient, something that learns, something that hungers. These are not just streets and buildings, they are battlegrounds, altars and tombs. What you leave behind of yourself, your pain, your fear, it doesn't just dissipate, it lingers, it congeals, and sometimes it wakes up. Now imagine this, how many corners like this exist in your city? How many places have been so soaked in a single powerful emotion that they have begun to think for themselves? The truth is, the world is filled with these sleeping gods of sorrow, and every act of desperation is a prayer that helps them grow stronger. Let's return to the nature of bargains, for that is the poisoned well from which all these stories drink. The transaction of the flesh is perhaps the oldest, but it is also the most spiritually porous. When you engage in such an act, you are not merely connecting two bodies, you are opening a conduit between two souls, two histories, two entire universes of experience and attachment, and sometimes things travel along that conduit that were never meant to be shared. There was a man, a broker of sorts in this world, who told me of what he called the echo girls. These were women who, after a certain client, would be changed. They would pick up habits, phrases, even memories that were not their own. They were psychically imprinted. He told me of a girl, barely 20, named Maya. She was vibrant, full of nervous energy, always tapping her fingers. She spent one night with an older man, a wealthy industrialist, who was a known recluse. He paid an exorbitant sum for her time. When she returned, she was different. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. She stopped tapping her fingers. She developed a taste for classical music, which she had previously hated, and she began to sketch intricate architectural designs on napkins. Despite having no training or interest in art, she was him, a faint echo of the man she had been with, his personality bleeding into hers and overwriting parts of who she was. She was haunted by a living man. The change was terrifyingly subtle at first. Friends would remark that she seemed more mature, more calm, but the broker saw the truth. Her eyes had lost their spark. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of an old man, not a young woman. She even complained of a phantom pain in her left leg, the same leg the industrialist had injured in a childhood accident. She was a ghost of him, walking around in her own body. The broker explained that some people, through sheer force of will or a lifetime of practiced narcissism, have such a powerful sense of self that they overwhelm those around them. They don't just occupy a room, they conquer it, and in moments of intense intimacy, they can leave a psychic residue so potent that it colonizes the other person. Maya's story is a chilling one because there is no monster, no ghost, no curse. There is only a man whose soul was so dense, so heavy, that it left a permanent impression on a younger, more malleable spirit. She became a living locket, a walking music box, carrying a piece of him wherever she went. The industrialist, the broker theorized, did this intentionally. He was old, nearing the end of his life, and perhaps this was his twisted form of immortality, to splinter his consciousness, to plant pieces of himself in the young and beautiful, ensuring that his tastes, his memories, his very essence would live on, even if the host was unaware of the origin of their new personality. He wasn't buying a night of pleasure, he was buying a foothold in the future. This is a form of vampirism that leaves no marks on the neck. It is the vampirism of the soul. It is a warning that the most dangerous entities are not the ones that creep from the shadows of the supernatural, but the ones that walk among us in the daylight, cloaked in power and wealth. Their hunger is for life itself, for the vitality they have lost or squandered, and they will consume it wherever they find it. They will overwrite your story with their own, turning you into a footnote in the grand narrative of their ego. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. Guard your soul. Know who you are. For in a world of transactions, your very identity can become a commodity, bought and sold by those whose spiritual gravity is strong enough to pull you out of your own orbit. These accounts, these whispers from the edge, are not meant merely to frighten. They are a map, a chart of the hidden reefs and treacherous currents that lie just beneath the surface of what we call reality. The world is not the solid, predictable place you imagine it to be. It is a breathing, dreaming entity, full of doorways and echoes, predators and parasites. The stories of these men and women who trade in the oldest currency are so potent because they operate in the liminal spaces, the doorways between public and private, between desire and disgust, between one soul and another. They are the gatekeepers, the ferrymen on a river of secrets, and they see the things that rise from the depths. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. Your attention, your belief, is the candle that allows me to read these dark pages. Do not let it be extinguished. Consider the inverse of the echo. What if, instead of being imprinted upon, the individual becomes the one who reads the imprint? I spoke once with a woman who had reached the end of her road. She was old, her face a roadmap of a hard-lived life, and she worked from a decrepit boarding house where the walls were stained with the ghosts of 1,000 lonely nights. Her name was Margot, and she had a terrible gift. She didn't just see the sins of her clients like Seraphina, she tasted their deaths. It began as a metallic tang in the back of her throat when she was with a man destined for a violent end, a taste of old pennies, of blood, for those who would die of sickness. It was a cloying sweetness, like rotting fruit, for those who would take their own lives. It was the bitter taste of ashes. This gift, or curse, made her work an unbearable litany of endings. Every man who walked through her door was a walking corpse, a ghost waiting for his moment of departure. She could taste the car crash on the breath of the young man who laughed too loudly. She could taste the cancerous tumor in the kiss of the businessman who boasted of his success. She tasted the cold, lonely silence of a heart attack in the touch of a man who spoke only of his estranged family. Her life was a constant funeral, a procession of the doomed who paid her for a moment of fleeting life, while she was assaulted by the overwhelming certainty of their death. She knew how their stories ended, every last one. The true horror of her situation was its utter uselessness. She tried to warn a man once, a young man who tasted of seawater and despair. She told him to stay away from the pier, to not go out on his boat that weekend. He laughed at her, called her a crazy old woman, and left in a huff. She read his name in the obituaries 2 days later, lost at sea. After that, she never spoke of it again. What good was it to be a prophet if no one would listen? What good was a warning that was always mistaken for madness? Her gift was a locked room, a private theater where she was the sole, unwilling audience to the final act of every person she met. The knowledge was a poison that slowly ate away at her own hope for the future. She told me that the worst taste of all was nothing, an absence of flavor, a blankness, a void. She experienced this only once, with a client who seemed utterly normal, a polite, quiet man who paid and left without incident. But in his presence, there was no taste of pennies, or fruit, or ash. There was simply nothing, a complete null set. It was a taste so terrifyingly empty that it made her sick for days. She realized that he was not a man who was going to die. He was a man who was not truly alive. A hollow shell, a thing wearing a human suit. She understood that he was more dangerous than all the dying men combined, for a man who is not alive has nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is capable of anything. That emptiness haunted her more than any premonition of death. Death was an ending, a known quantity, but this was a void, a tear in the fabric of what it means to be human. It was the presence of an absence, and it chilled her to the core. This is a truth that is often overlooked in tales of the occult. We fear the dead, the dying, the monstrous, but perhaps we should fear the hollow, the ones who go through the motions of life without the spark, the ones whose souls have already departed, leaving the body on autopilot. They are the true wildcards, the true agents of chaos, because they are playing a different game, one with no stakes and no consequences. They are the real monsters, hiding in plain sight. This collection of visions paints a grim portrait, does it not? It suggests a world where intimacy is a doorway for infection, where places can become sentient predators, and where some humans are little more than spiritual black holes. It would be easy to fall into despair, but that is not the purpose of this telling. The purpose is knowledge. The purpose is armor. To know the shape of the predator is the first step in avoiding its jaws. To understand the nature of the trap is to learn how to not spring it. These are not just horror stories. They are survival guides for the soul in a world that seeks to consume it. They are whispers from the front lines of a war you didn't even know was being fought. A war for the very essence of who you are. The common thread is the transaction, the moment something is exchanged. Money for time, secrets for comfort, energy for a fleeting connection. It is in these moments of exchange that the barriers between us are at their thinnest. It is when we are vulnerable, seeking something from another, that we are most open to influence. Think of your own life, the bargains you make every day, the small compromises, the exchanges of service and energy. Are you aware of what you are truly trading? Are you conscious of the doors you are opening, even for a moment? We have been taught to see the world in purely material terms, but the spiritual economy is just as real and far more dangerous. Debts are incurred, prices are paid, and the currency is not always something you can hold in your hand. So what is the defense? How does one navigate this treacherous landscape? It begins with sovereignty, a fierce, unwavering ownership of your own soul, your own mind, your own energy. You must know the boundaries of yourself so completely that you can instantly recognize when something alien attempts to cross them. You must become a fortress, not of walls and stone, but of will and awareness. You must learn to listen to the whispers of your own intuition, that primal, ancient part of you that still remembers the language of the unseen world. It is the part of you that feels a sudden chill in a warm room, the part that feels an inexplicable distrust for a person with a kind smile. That is your guardian. That is your sentinel. Do not ignore its warnings. The people in these stories were often victims of circumstance, forced into desperation, but their tales serve as a lesson for us all. The ghost who haunted Luna's room was drawn to the vacancy she felt in her own life. The silence in the music box was released by an act of reluctant compliance. The locket was accepted because refusing it was a risk. The shadow man fed on the hopelessness that was allowed to fester. In every case, the horror found a crack, a vulnerability, a space that was not filled with the individual's own sovereign power. Fill those spaces within yourself. Know your own worth. not as a commodity to be traded, but as a universe unto yourself. For a soul that is whole and complete offers no purchase for the parasite, no doorway for the darkness. But the truth is, even the strongest fortress can be besieged. Even the most vigilant soul can be caught unaware. The world is patient, and the things that lurk in the shadows have nothing but time. The final story I will share tonight is not about a victim, but about a choice. It is the story of a man who worked as a driver, ferrying these women of the night from one client to the next. He was an observer, a silent confessor, the wheels of his car measuring out the beats of 100 secret lives. He thought he was separate, protected by the glass and steel of his vehicle. He was just the driver. He was wrong. He told me of the night he picked up a woman who was different. She wasn't beautiful or young. She was luminous. She got into his car, and the entire atmosphere shifted. The smell of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener was replaced by the scent of night-blooming jasmine and cold stone, like a forgotten temple. She gave him an address he had never heard of, in a part of the city that was little more than crumbling warehouses and abandoned lots. She didn't speak a word during the drive, but he felt her presence like a low hum, a vibration that seemed to settle deep in his bones. It was not frightening, it was awesome. In the rearview mirror, her eyes seemed to hold the light of distant stars. He was a moth, and she was a strange, cold flame. When they arrived, she paid him not with money, but with a question. "Do you wish to see what lies behind the curtain?" she asked, her voice like the chime of a crystal bell. "Do you wish to understand the game you have been watching?" He was afraid. Every instinct told him to drive away, to forget her, to return to his simple, observable world. But he was also tired of being a spectator, tired of the endless, meaningless cycle of desperation he witnessed every night. He wanted to know. He wanted to understand. He said yes. She led him from the car into a warehouse that was dark and cavernous. In the center, a single candle burned, and by its light, he saw them, all the figures from the stories we have heard tonight. The man with the cold hands, the traveler, holding a new unopened music box, a woman wearing a silver locket, her face a smooth blank, a man with a hammer, his eyes full of blood, and a tall, thin shadow that detached itself from the wall. They were all there, an audience, and the woman who had brought him there stood before them and smiled. "We have a new player," she said. The driver understood then. This was not a random collection of horrors. It was a society, a hidden ecosystem with its own rules, its own predators and prey, and he had just been invited to stop being a pawn and to pick a side. The woman, this luminous being, was a recruiter, a broker not of flesh, but of fate. She offered him a choice: remain a victim, a clueless observer in a game he couldn't comprehend, or embrace the darkness, understand its mechanics, and become a conscious participant. The price, she explained, was his ignorance. To the price was his comfortable, safe reality. He would have to see the world as it truly is, a hunting ground, and he would have to choose whether he would be the hunter or the hunted. What he chose, he did not tell me. He only told me of the choice itself. That is where his story, his whisper, ended. And now, that same choice is presented to you. Through these stories, you have been brought to the door of the warehouse. You have been shown a glimpse of what lies behind the curtain. You can no longer claim ignorance. You have seen the parasites, the predators, the hollow men. You have heard the whispers. You can choose to dismiss this as mere story, to turn off the screen, and return to your safe, predictable world, or you can accept the knowledge that has been given to you. You can open your eyes to the deeper, darker reality that hums just beneath the surface of everything you know. You can start to see the patterns, to recognize the signs, to understand the game. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Was this invitation intended for your ears? The choice is yours. Let me know in the comments if you are ready to see more. Until the next shadow falls, walk with awareness. Look into the reflections. Listen to the silence between the sounds. For the world is far more complex and far more hungry than you have ever been told. And the greatest secret of all is that the veil between worlds is not in some distant haunted land. It is behind the eyes of the person sitting next to you. It is in the bargain you are about to make. It is in the door you are about to open. Be careful which ones you choose. The darkness is always waiting. It is always patient, and it is always welcoming.